All right, today we're going to talk about Aristotle. And Aristotle's, Aristotle's ethic is called perfectionism or virtue ethics. And this is going to be very different than the other theories we've talked about so far. We talked about the two broad categories of deontological ethics, which is a fancy word for duty based, or you do what's right because it's right. You're not worried about the consequences or outcomes or how you feel about it. You do it simply because it's the right thing to do. It's not for hope of reward or fear of punishment. You're doing it because it's right. Teleological theories, on the other hand, are interested in the end results or consequences. And so this is also known as consequentialism, where it's not just about intention or duty, but also outcomes. And their retort to the deontologist would be the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Having good intentions isn't enough. You have to have good outcomes to go with the good intentions. In fact, the teleological would put outcomes over intentions and vice versa. Well, Aristotle's theory is different than both of these, and it comes under the broad category of what we would call virtue ethics. And virtue ethics come from the Greek presuppositions, and this was common to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And this presupposition was knowledge is good, ignorance is evil. Now, this is really important because if you believe this, knowledge is good and ignorance is evil, well, one of the ways you can live a good or right life is to become more educated. And the way you help people aren't evil now, they're uneducated or ignorant. So when people are acting out or doing something bad, you don't have to judge and condemn them, educate them, teach them the right way to think about or do something. And so this has become a standard, and you saw this in Greek thought, where Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle thought that you could actually teach or habituate virtue, especially Aristotle. He believed just like we can have bad habits, we can give ourselves good habits. And that's really how he saw this process of making someone an ethical or virtuous person, was by educating them using knowledge to find the right or best way to live. The next aspect of Aristotle's life is this concept of erte, E-R-T-E. It's a Greek word and it means excellent. And so this could be almost like our Bill and Ted's ethical theory. If you ever saw Bill and Ted's ethic, ethical adventure, um, excellent adventure, their little motto to each other was be excellent to one another, be excellent to yourself, be excellent in what you do. And I just find this so fascinating. When I was a little boy, um, my daddy worked two jobs to provide for the family. And he worked as like an administrator by day, and then he would work as a janitor by night. So here's a guy, he's the principal and the janitor of the same school. And I remember one day, I must have been like 7 or 8 years old, and it was my bedtime, but my dad had like a lunch pail and he was headed out the door to work. And so he tucked me in, but he wanted me to really get this. And he got down on one knee so I could look him in the eyes. And he said, Fred, I want to tell you something very important. Whether I'm being the administrator, principal of the school, hiring, firing people, choosing curriculum, dealing with issues, or whether I'm scrubbing toilets and mopping floors, I do the most excellent job that I can do. Administrating or toilet scrubbing, I do my best. And you can tell how that affected me. I mean, I still remember that over half a century later, and it has become a key part of my own moral development and character. And I can give a living testimony of how well that has served me in my life. And it's very similar to the biblical principles of like the stewards, right? One was given 1 talent, the other 5, the other 10, and then they were judged or evaluated based on what they did with those talents. Well, just as it is in the scriptures, he who is faithful with little things will be given great things. that's kind of what Aristotle and my daddy were teaching me, even as a young man, that if I could be dutiful and responsible and excellent in something like picking up trash or making my bed, then I would be given more responsibility and privileges with greater things like borrowing the family car, being able to go on sleepovers, getting a job, these sorts of things. So knowledge is primary. Knowledge is good, ignorance is evil. In all that you do, be excellent to yourself, to your endeavors, to one another. And then the third movement, or the end, and Aristotle's really into what is the end goal of something? What was it put here for? So for an example, the end goal of an acorn is to grow into an oak tree, become mature, and then bear its own acorns. So that would be the end result. The end result of a child would be to grow into a man or woman, to then become mature, propagate, and to fulfill that role they had as a human being. And Aristotle believed the end goal of a human was happiness. Now, this ain't no yuppie happiness we're talking about. This is like a deep, abiding joy or contentment. So it makes me think a lot of even the Christian concept of joy as opposed to happiness. Jesus didn't come to make us happy, like circumstantial happiness, but he came to give us this deep, abiding joy or peace because of our right relationship with him. Now, Aristotle isn't trying to get in right relationship with the gods for happiness. He's trying to live in accordance with human reason, with knowledge. And he believes if we live a knowledgeable life and avoid ignorance, and we are excellent in everything we do, and then there's two more qualifiers he gives. The way to be happy and well-balanced, well-proportioned, is to avoid extremes. And there's two extremes, the extreme of excess and the extreme of deficiency. Okay. Man, I'm cramming a lot in here. And the goal for the human being, and you can do this either individually for yourself, or we could do this collectively for our class, or we could do it nationally or globally for our nation or our planet. And so I really like how you can use this ethic from an individual all the way to a corporate decision-making process. And basically, this is how avoiding extremes works. So we have two extremes of excess and deficiency. And at this point, Aristotle's theory is also called the golden mean. And I want to show you a picture of that real quick, but maybe I'll put one up later. But you've probably seen it before. If you take a rectangle, like the squares we see ourselves in on this Zoom call, and you divide it in thirds, and then in thirds again, 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 and you trace a line from one corner through the rectangle, hitting all the points, it creates a Fibonacci spiral. And we see this Fibonacci spiral in everything from pine cones to nautilus shells to galaxies to your thumbprint. And some people have called it like the trademark or copyrighted by God, this Fibonacci sequence. And the Greeks realized that it's much more aesthetically pleasing having something asymmetrical than symmetrical, because in a symmetrical world, everything is kind of stagnant and sterile. But in a fractal world where you're dealing in thirds and branching off, just like how a tree grows, right? It comes up from the trunk, then the branches divide off, and then you have the twigs coming off the branches. But if you do this rule of thirds, you can actually draw a tree even if you're not artistic. You simply make the first branches 1/3 the length of the trunk, and then the next little twigs 1/3 the length of the branch, and then the next little twigs 1/3 of the third. And all of a sudden you get this fractalized branch. It's how we see river deltas. It's how we see many plants grow. Even the Vitruvian Man from Leonardo is based on these principles of the thirds. The reason I'm making a big deal about this is Aristotle isn't saying find the middle point between excess and deficiency. I mean, because that's what it sounds like, right? Find that balance in between. But he's not saying be a fence straddler. He's not saying be lukewarm or mediocre. He's saying find a well balanced or well proportioned life. And I'm going to give you a couple examples. And remember, it's all to be done through knowledge, and we're to do it in an excellent way. And so we can take any topic. And so let's take something like fear. So if we use fear, how are we supposed to deal with fear? And I'll give you an example on like a battlefield. So what would we call an excess of fear? What would we call someone who was excessively fearful, at least in a military situation? Anybody? Want me to call on somebody?
Cowardly, I guess.
Coward, thank you. And what would we call someone who has no fear? Like you see all these people in East County with their no fear bumper stickers and car decals. I would call someone with no fear foolhardy. Yeah, a fool or foolhardy. Yeah. So here we have the concept of fear, and we can respond to it excessively and become cowardly and paralyzed by our fear, or we cannot take the fear seriously and we can be foolhardy and hapless about it. What Aristotle is saying is find that golden mean, not the middle, but find that well-balanced proportion part, and this could have to do with you or your community, and that is how you should engage. And what we would call someone who understands why they should be afraid, but they still act in spite of their fear, that is what we would call courage or courageous. So coward, foolhardiness, courage. We're supposed to shoot for the courage. Now, what courage may look like for me may look very different than what it looks like to you. So say in ancient Greece, we have Achilles, who's virtually invincible, right? The gods dip him in invincibility, and the only part of him is vulnerable is his Achilles tendon, where the god was holding him when he was dunked into this vat of invincibility. So for this character, it would make sense that Achilles, he doesn't have to be afraid, right? Except it would have behooved him to maybe put a little shield or chainmail or something over his Achilles tendon, because that was his one weakness. Now, someone else may be born timid, frail, afraid of their own shadow, but they still want to fight for their city, for their family, for their homeland. This person might take a stake and a chain out to the battlefield and literally stake themselves to the ground so that they can't run away. That might be courageous for that person, where for Achilles, a well-balanced life would be simply having a little shield or buckler behind his heel. So it's not going to look the same for everyone, but it could be different. A well-proportioned life for one person could look different than a well-proportioned life for another. The key is to have a well-proportioned, balanced life. Now, that's individually, but see, as a culture, let me give you another example. This whole mask thing we got going on with the COVID-19. What would an excess of mask wearing look like?
Wearing it in the car.
Thank you. Just that was what I was thinking. Whenever I see people driving around, and I try to give them the benefit of the doubt, and they're not just crazy, but I figure maybe they're picking up a sick grandmother, or maybe they got a kid with respiratory problems and they're just trying to be, or maybe they carpool. I don't know. But yeah, to me, to me, that would be excessive. Or like wearing a mask all places, all times, period, right? That would be excessive. And then what would be deficient mask use?
Putting like straps on doily and calling it a mask.
Yeah, I mean, it would be not wearing a mask anytime, even when it would make really good sense for yourself or others to wear a mask. And so A well-balanced, well-proportioned mask response would be find appropriate times and places to wear the mask, but then realize when it's not necessary. And that's basically what we're trying to do as a collective, as a society, right? Now we have different groups on different sides trying to fight for what is balance, but our society as a whole, or our state or city or school as a whole, has come up with a collective understanding of when you need to wear a mask. You see how this is working? Okay, let's do one more example just so I can make sure this is in your heads, and then we'll dialogue about it. How about abortion? That's one of the big topics in the day. Excessive abortion would be to abort all fetuses at all times, having zero population growth. Deficient abortion would be not allowing abortion even in the case of where the mother's life's in danger or something of that nature. So no abortion for no reason, abortion all the time for every reason. Those would be the two extremes. And just like the mask wearing, our society has kind of worked back and forth trying to find a balance in between those two extreme positions. And the longer you carry a child, the more rights that child gets in our culture. So the first trimester, you can pretty much get an abortion, maybe a little light counseling just to make sure this is what you wanted to do. But the longer you wait, the more difficult and more involved it would be to get an abortion. Until once the child is born, at least at the moment in this country, we have rules against infanticide. And that child gets full rights as a citizen once it is born. And so that is how our culture has tried to work out the excess and the deficiencies of abortion, is trying to find this golden mean or this balance in between where there might be certain situations or cases where that is acceptable. All right. So that is Aristotle in just a little over 15 minutes. Knowledge is good, ignorance is evil. Be excellent in all that you do and look for that well-proportioned, balanced life. Not mediocre, not lukewarm, but well-balanced and proportioned, and that will bring you happiness. And not just circumstantial happiness, but that deep, abiding contentment that comes from living a good life.